There are nights when everything stops. A fancy restaurant, a glass of wine, a gesture almost invisible, and the certainty that someone is going to die if you do nothing. Isabel was just a waitress, tired, invisible, with a daughter waiting at home. But she saw what no one else saw, and in a second she tripped, a glass fell, the wine spilled, and without knowing it, she had just saved a life, and changed hers forever. Like this, if it touched your soul. It's more than a click. It's a silent hug between those who know what it is to decide in an instant. Comment how you think this story is going to end. Your heart already feels it. We want to read you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but for us, it means a lot. Thanks for being here. The rain hit the windows of the Roman restaurant with a force that seemed to follow the rhythm of something unavoidable. Isabel Rivers cleaned the glass cup for the third time, holding it against the dim light to make sure no mark was left. Her hands, rough from years of hard work, shook slightly, not because of the cold coming from the door, but because of the tension in her stomach since the manager had called her to his office 2 hours before. "Table 22 is for Mr. Vega," Matthew, the manager, had said without looking up from his tablet. "Total privacy, Isabel. Perfect service. Eyes down, no small talk. Understood?" She had nodded. She always nodded. She had spent 26 years learning that. Survival was built on small, silent agreements. The main dining room had been closed to the public. Only the private room in the back existed, with its large lamp casting gold shadows on the white cloth. Isabel fixed her black apron, tied her brown hair in a tight tail, and took a deep breath. In her mind, as always, Sarah's face appeared, her 6-year-old daughter, sleeping at Mrs. Miller's house, unaware that every dollar Isabel saved in that envelope hidden in the closet brought her a bit closer to something she still dared to call a future. Nursing. That was the dream. A degree, a uniform, a goal that went beyond filling glasses and smiling when customers asked for too much. The guests began to arrive shortly after 9. Men in dark suits, watches that shone more than the glasses, polite but cold voices. And then he walked in. Alexander Vega. Isabel recognized him from photos she had seen in magazines she couldn't afford to buy. 28 years old, heir to a business empire, sharp face and eyes that seemed to read rooms before entering them. He was not what she expected. He walked without hurry, without the pride she had learned to expect in the rich. He greeted each guest with a nod, sat in the center of the table, and waited in silence while the others moved their chairs. Isabel served the water, then the wine. Her moves were smooth, almost invisible. She had learned to disappear in her own work, to become part of the room. But something about that night was different. Maybe it was the tension in the air. Maybe it was the way one of the men sitting at the end of the table kept looking at Alexander with a look that did not seem friendly. "The Asian market is more open than we thought," one of the guests said while Isabel took away the plates. "But the internal pushback is still a problem." "Internal pushback," Alexander replied calmly, "usually comes from people who prefer the comfort of what they know to the risk of what is needed." There was a short silence, awkward. Isabel went back to the kitchen. Her hands were still shaking. She didn't know why. Thomas Beltran arrived 40 minutes late, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was younger than the others, maybe 32 years old, hair slicked back and a suit that looked too perfect, as if it had been ironed minutes before walking in. He said sorry with a voice that sounded practiced and sat in front of Alexander. Isabel served him wine. He didn't look at her. No one ever did. The talk went on, but the tone had changed. Thomas talked too much. His laughs were louder than the others. He moved his hands while explaining details about a business deal that Isabel didn't understand. But she noticed something, the way Alexander watched him. Not with doubt, but with sharp attention, like someone studying a piece that doesn't quite fit. "The changes you are asking for," Thomas said while cutting his meat, "affect interests that have been there for decades. Not everyone is ready to change so fast." "Set interests," Alexander replied without raising his voice, "are often signs of old ways. If something doesn't change, it dies out." Thomas laughed, too loud, too fast. Isabel was by the window, opening a new bottle of wine, when she saw the reflection in the glass. Thomas reached his hand toward the salt, but he didn't take it. His fingers touched something small, clear, hidden in his hand. And then, with a move so fast it almost didn't happen, his hand passed over Alexander's. "Glass?" Time stopped. Isabel felt the floor move under her feet. She wasn't sure what she had seen. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. She looked around. No one else had noticed anything. The talk went on. Thomas was smiling. Alexander was bringing his glass to his lips. And then something inside Isabel, something old, natural, impossible to ignore, took control. There was no time to think. There was no plan. Only the drive of a body that decides before the mind can stop it. Isabel walked toward the table with a water jug in her hand. Her legs moved on their own. Her heart hit her chest so hard she feared the others could hear it. 3 steps. 2. 1. And she tripped. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't subtle. Her foot hit the leg of Alexander's chair, and the jug tilted, spilling cold water over his lap, and in the process, tipping the wine glass he was about to drink. The glass rolled on the cloth. The red wine spread like a dark stain. Silence fell over the table, like a heavy stone. Isabel stood frozen with the jug still in her hand, looking at the mess she had just made. Her mind was screaming sorry, reasons, please, but her mouth made no sound. Alexander stood up slowly. Water dripped from his pants. He looked at the tipped glass, then the spilled wine, and finally he looked up at her. There was no anger in his eyes, no confusion either. There was something else, understanding. For 3 long seconds, their eyes met. Isabel saw in them a silent question, and he saw in hers an answer that didn't need words. "I'm sorry," she whispered with a shaky voice. Alexander reached out, pushed away the remaining glass that still had a few drops, and nodded his head. "Don't worry," he said, with a calm that was different from the tension of the moment. It was an accident, but they both knew it wasn't. Thomas, who had been watching the scene with a hard face, cleaned his mouth with the napkin and stood up. "Excuse me," he said with a tight voice. "I don't feel well. I think I should leave." No one stopped him. He left the room with fast steps, and the sound of the door closing rang out like a final word. The rest of the dinner went by in an awkward silence. Isabel finished the service with shaking hands, avoiding Alexander's look. When the guests finally left, she began to clean the table with robotic moves, but Alexander hadn't left. He stayed seated, watching her in silence. When Isabel looked up, he was leaving several bills on the table, more money than she earned. "In a week. This act," he said with a low voice, "is worth more than any amount." He stood up, walked toward the door, but before leaving he stopped. "Some things, after being seen, never stop being dangerous," he added without turning around. "Be careful." And then he went, leaving Isabel alone with the echo of those words and the certainty that her life had just changed forever. Isabel didn't sleep that night. Lying on the small sofa that served as a bed in her one-room apartment, she looked at the cracked ceiling while listening to Sarah's soft breathing in the next room. Alexander's words repeated in her mind like a warning she couldn't quite figure out. What had she seen exactly? Had it been real? Maybe it was just fear. Maybe she had just imagined Thomas's move. Maybe all of this was her tired mind playing a trick. But no, she had seen it. And Alexander had understood too. At 6 in the morning, Isabel got up, made Sarah's breakfast, and left her at Mrs. Miller's house before going to work. The day went by with a painful slowness. Every time her phone rang, her heart jumped. But there were no calls, no news, only the weight of waiting. It was 3 days of silence before the phone finally rang. "Miss Rivers." The voice was male, professional, neutral. "My name is Mark Lawrence. I am a personal advisor to Mr. Alexander Vega. He would like to meet with you. Would you be available tomorrow at 3 in the afternoon?" Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. "For what?" "He will explain that to you personally. Central Cafe, does that work for you?" She doubted. Everything in her gut screamed for her to say no, to hang up, to forget all this. But there was another voice, smaller, more stubborn, that reminded her of Alexander's face that night, the certainty in his eyes. "I'll be there," she replied. The next day, Isabel arrived at Central Cafe 15 minutes early. She sat at a back table with her hands tied over her lap, trying to control the shaking that hadn't left her since the call. She had left Sarah with Miller, making up an excuse about a doctor's visit. Alexander arrived exactly at 3. He wore casual clothes, dark jeans and a grey sweater. No bodyguards, no team, just him. He sat in front of her without asking, and waited for the waiter to serve 2 coffees before speaking. "The wine I was going to drink that night was tested," he said, straight to the point. "It had a substance that would have caused a heart attack in minutes. It would have looked natural, stress, too much work. No one would have guessed anything." Isabel felt the room spinning around her. "Thomas Beltran," Alexander went on, "disappeared that same night. I have people looking for him, but so far there is no sign. The changes I am making in the company threaten old interests. Powerful people, people who prefer to remove problems rather than talk solutions." He paused, took a sip of coffee, and looked at her directly. "You saved my life, Miss Rivers, and I want you to understand the results of that. If someone saw what you saw, if someone thinks you know something, you could become a problem for them too." The fear that Isabel had been holding for days finally found its voice. "What do you want me to do?" "For now, nothing. Go on with your normal life. But take this." He slid a card over the table. "A phone number. Nothing more. If anything seems strange, if anyone calls you, if you feel something isn't right, call. At any time. Don't wait." Isabel took the card, with shaking fingers. "Why are you helping me?" Alexander smiled for the first time. A small smile, almost sad. "Because you owe me nothing, and I owe you everything." He stood up, left money on the table, and left without saying anything else. Isabel stayed seated for 20 minutes, looking at the card, feeling the weight of choices she hadn't asked to make but could no longer undo. The following days were silent torture. Isabel tried to keep the routine: work, pick up Sarah, make dinner, put her to bed. But every noise in the hall scared her. Every person who walked too close on the street made her turn her head. The envelope with her savings was still in the closet, but now she checked it 3 times a day, as if it could vanish at any moment. Mrs. Miller noticed the change. "You're pale, girl," she told her one afternoon while picking up Sarah. "Are you okay?" "Just tired," Isabel lied. "Work." But Miller knew her too well. She had seen her arrive 3 years ago with a backpack, a scared girl, and the silent drive of someone who has made the hardest choice of her life. She had seen her get up every morning, even when everything seemed impossible. "If you need to talk," Miller said, squeezing her hand, "you know where I am." That night, the phone rang. It was past midnight. Isabel woke up suddenly, with her heart in her throat. The number was unknown. "Miss Rivers." The voice was male, formal, with an accent she couldn't place. "I am Detective Duran, from the police department. I need you to come to the station first thing tomorrow. It's about Mr. Thomas Beltran. He has been found dead, and your name is in our search as a possible witness." Isabel felt her whole body freeze. "Dead? How?" "That's what we need to find out. Can you come at 9? Yes, I'll be there." She hung up with shaking hands. For 10 seconds, she stood frozen, and then she remembered Alexander's words. "If anything seems strange, call." She looked for the card in her bag and dialed the number with clumsy fingers. Alexander answered on the first ring. "What happened?" Isabel told him about the call. Her voice broke while she talked. On the other end, there was a short but heavy silence. "Don't go to that station," he finally said, "and don't answer any more calls from that number." "Why?" "Because Thomas Beltran is not dead, and no one from the police department has your phone number." Fear turned into pure terror. "What do I do? Where is your daughter?" "Sleeping in the room." "Listen carefully, lock the door, do not open for any reason. I am sending people. They will be there in less than 20 minutes. When they arrive, they will tell you a password. Miller sends her regards. Only then open. Understood?" "Yes." "Isabel." It was the first time he called her by her name. "You're going to be okay, I promise." He hung up. Isabel ran to the room, picked up Sarah sleeping in her arms, and locked the bedroom door. She sat on the floor, with her daughter held against her. Chest and waited. The minutes felt like hours. Every sound in the building was a threat, every creak of wood a scary presence. And then she heard steps on the stairs. They went up slowly. No hurry. They stopped in front of her door. Someone tried the handle. Isabel held her breath. Sarah moved in her sleep but didn't wake up. The handle moved again, harder. And then she heard something that turned her blood cold. The sound of metal against metal. Someone was picking the lock. With shaking hands, Isabel sent a text to Alexander's number. "They are here." The reply came in seconds. 2 minutes. Hold on. The door creaked. The lock was giving way. Isabel closed her eyes, held Sarah against her chest, and prayed for the first time in years. The lock gave way with a dry snap. The door opened slowly. Isabel prepared for the worst. But then she heard other voices in the hall. Fast steps. A male voice shouting, "Freeze! Hands where I can see them!" There was a short fight. Dull hits, and then silence. Someone knocked on the bedroom door. "Miss Rivers?" Miller sends her regards. Isabel opened with legs that barely held her. In front of her were two men dressed in black, with serious but not scary faces. Behind them, in the hall, another man lay face down with hands tied behind his back. "Are you okay?" one of the men asked. She nodded, unable to speak. "We have a car waiting below. Bring only what is needed. We are leaving now." Isabel packed a bag in 5 minutes. Clothes for Sarah, papers, the envelope with savings. The girl finally woke up, confused and scared. "Mum, what's happening?" "We're going for a ride, honey. Everything is fine." They went down the back stairs. The tied man had been taken away. In the street, a black SUV with dark windows waited. They got in. The car started before Isabel could even fix her belt. They drove for almost 2 hours. Sarah fell asleep again. Isabel looked out the window, watching how the city became highway, the highway rural, roads, and the road's dirt paths among olive trees. Finally, they arrived at a stone house, alone, surrounded by silence and old trees. The moonlight made it look like it was from another time. Alexander was waiting at the door. When Isabel got out of the car with Sarah in her arms, he walked over with a grave face. "I'm sorry for all this," he said. "But here you will be safe. The house is secure. My men will stand guard 24 hours. No one knows about this place." Isabel looked at him with tired eyes, too tired to keep asking. "For how long?" "As long as needed. I'm closing the circle. I know who is behind this. I just need proof. Give me a week, maybe 2. He walked her inside. The house was simple but comfy. White walls, wood furniture, a full kitchen. In the main room there were 2 beds. Isabel put Sarah in the smaller one and covered her with care. When she went back to the living room, Alexander was making tea. "Why are you doing all this?" she finally asked, sitting at the table. "You could just let me go, get me away from all this." Alexander served 2 cups and sat in front of her. "Because you made a choice no one asked you to make. You risked your job, maybe your life, for someone you didn't know. That is rare and valuable, and I am not one to forget debts like that. You owe me nothing. I owe you everything," he fixed, "and I am going to make sure you get out of this without a single mark." They drank tea in silence. Outside, the wind moved the olive, branches creating shadows that danced on the walls. "Is Thomas really alive?" Isabel asked. "Yes, he fled the country, but those who hired him did not, and they are the problem." "Who are they?" Alexander paused before answering. "People from the old guard of the company. People who gained from dirty deals, from under-the-table agreements. The changes I made left them exposed. They preferred to remove me rather than lose their perks. And now I have names. I have bank records. I have emails. I just need time to build a strong case, and in the meantime I need you and your daughter out of reach. Rest, Isabel. Tomorrow will be another day, and I promise every day will bring you closer to the end of this." When he left, Isabel stayed sitting at the table looking at the empty cup. For the first time in days, she felt something like relief. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe. The days in the house among olives took a rhythm of their own. At first, Isabel could barely sleep. Every noise woke her. Every shadow was a threat. But slowly the silence of the country began to enter her bones, to calm the fast beat of her heart. Sarah, unaware of the gravity of everything, explored the place with the natural curiosity of children. She found lizards among the rocks, chased butterflies, made up stories about the trees. One morning she asked Isabel, "Why don't we go home? Because sometimes we need to be in new places for a while. Is it like a vacation?" "Something like that." The girl seemed happy with the answer and went back to playing. Alexander came every 2 days. He never stayed long. He brought food, books for Sarah, news carefully edited not to scare Isabel more than needed. But she read between the lines. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the dark circles under his eyes he couldn't hide. The calls he took outside the house, walking among the olives, with a low voice and grave tone. One afternoon, while Sarah was napping, Isabel followed him, outside. "Tell me the truth," she asked him. "How much longer?" Alexander stopped, turned his back for a few seconds, and then turned toward her. "I have the proof, names, bank accounts in tax havens, emails that show the plot. But the person who ordered all this has links, judges, politicians, media. If I move too fast, everything vanishes. I need to do it right. Just once. No room for error. And what about me? Do I stay here forever?" "No," he replied firmly. "In a week, 10 days at most, everything will be over, and then you can go back to your life." Isabel laughed without humor. "What life? I lost my job. I left my apartment. Sarah left school. All for a second of courage," Alexander finished. "You did the right thing, and I am going to make sure that is not punished." They looked at each other in silence. The wind moved the olive leaves, creating a sound like the whisper of the sea. "When this ends," he finally said, "I want to offer you something. Not as pay, not as a debt, as recognition, but I need it to end first." "What do you want to offer me?" "Later," he replied with half a smile. "First, let the sun come out." And he left, leaving her with more questions than answers, but also with something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. 9 days after arriving at the house, Alexander appeared at dawn with a face Isabel hadn't seen before. It wasn't relief. It was pure drive. "It's done," he said as he walked in. "I have everything. Tonight I present the proof to the prosecutor. Tomorrow morning the arrests will begin." Isabel felt her legs shake. "And us? You will go back to the city the day after tomorrow, to a new apartment. Safer. I have set up quiet protection for the next few months, just as a safety measure. But the direct threat will be over." Sarah came running out of the room, unaware of the talk, and jumped into Alexander's arms. In those days, the man had become a familiar presence for the girl. He brought her sweets. He told her stories. He never left without asking her how she was. "Are we going home?" the little girl asked. "Yes, little one. To a new home." That night, while Sarah slept, Isabel and Alexander sat on the stone porch. The air smelled of wet earth and wild rosemary. The stars covered the sky like diamonds spread on black velvet. "What will happen to them?" Isabel asked. "To the people who ordered all this. They will face charges for attempted murder, plot, corporate fraud. The proof is solid. They will spend years in prison." "And Thomas?" "He is making a deal. In exchange for his talk, they will cut his time. It's not perfect justice, but it's what we have." There was a long silence. Comfy. Isabel looked at Alexander's hands, hands that probably had never known physical work, but in those days had held the weight of protecting her. "I don't know how to thank you for all you've done." Alexander shook his head. "I owe you my life. Anything I've done is barely an attempt to balance the scales." "The scales are already balanced." "No," he replied, looking at her with force. "They are not, because what you did has no price. There is no way to pay it back. I can only try to build something good on it." He stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and watched the dark olive grove. "When you go back, I want you to think about something. You said once you dreamed of studying nursing, that you had an envelope saved with money, that every dollar was a step closer to that future." Isabel felt a lump in her throat. "That dream is still there," he went on, "and I want to help you reach it, not as charity, not as a debt, but as an investment in someone who showed she had something money cannot buy, the courage to do the right thing when no one is looking. I can't accept that. I'm not asking you to accept now, just to think about it, to consider that maybe the universe works in strange ways, that maybe a spilled glass changed 2 lives, not just one." He sat next to her again. "Take your time. Go back to your routine. Get your life back. And when you are ready, if you decide you want that future, I will be there to make sure you get it." Isabel felt hot tears rolling down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of something she had forgotten existed, the chance that good things could also happen. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for reminding me that there are still people who choose the light." The next morning, the first news began to appear. Big arrests in the Vega group, Claims of corruption, fraud, criminal plot. Headlines covered the papers. The news spoke of nothing else. And in the middle of it all, Isabel packed her few things, took Sarah by the hand, and got back into the black SUV that would take her back to her life. But it was no longer the same life, nor was she the same person. The apartment Alexander had set up was in a quiet neighborhood, near a park where Sarah could play. It was bigger than the old one, with 2 rooms, a full kitchen and large windows that let in the sunlight. It wasn't a palace, but compared to what Isabel had known, it felt like one. During the first weeks, she just tried to get back to normal. She signed Sarah up for a new school. She looked for work in cafes and restaurants. The letters Alexander had quietly provided opened doors that would have been closed before. She got a job in a small bistro near the center, with hours that let her pick up Sarah in the afternoons. But something had changed inside her. Every time she put money in the envelope, which she now kept in a safer place, she felt the weight of that talk on the porch. Alexander's words rang in her mind. The dream is still there. 3 months after the event, she got a certified letter. Inside was a thick envelope and a handwritten note. Isabel, the doors are open. You only need to walk through them. You will do the rest yourself. With respect, A.V. Inside the envelope were sign-up papers for the university nursing program, tuition paid for 3 years, plus a grant for costs that would cover rent, food, and Sarah's needs. Isabel read the papers 3 times, then she put them on the table and cried for 20 minutes. They weren't just tears of thanks. They were tears of fear, of spinning at the chance that her life could really change, of terror at the idea of failing, of not being good enough for such a chance. That night, after putting Sarah to bed, she called Alexander's number. I can't accept this, she said when he answered. Why not? Because it's too much. Because I don't know if I can do it. Because I am afraid of failing you, of failing my daughter, of not being enough. There was a silence on the other end. Can I tell you something? Alexander finally said. When I was 19, my father died. Suddenly, he left me in charge of an empire I barely understood. I had advisors, lawyers, people with decades of work, and I was just a scared kid who didn't know if I was good enough. He paused. One day, one of the old bosses told me something I never forgot. The fear of not being enough is the proof that you understand the weight. It's those who have no fear who are dangerous. You have fear because you understand what this means, and that is exactly why I know you will do it. Isabel closed her eyes, feeling the weight of those words. You don't have to decide now, he went on. Just think about it. Talk to Sarah. Talk to yourself. And when you are ready, let me know. Isabel spent the next 2 weeks in a kind of trance. She worked. She cared for Sarah. But her mind was somewhere else. She saw mums in the park with their kids and wondered what kind of life she could give Sarah with a college degree. She saw nurses in the hospital where she took Sarah for routine checks and wondered if she could be one of them. One afternoon, Sarah came from school with a drawing. It was Isabel, in a white uniform, holding the hand of a little girl. What is this? Isabel asked. It's you, Mum, when you are a nurse, like you always wanted. Isabel looked at her daughter, at her big, trusting eyes, at her smile that knew no doubt. Would you like Mom to be a nurse? Sarah nodded with joy. Because then you could help many kids like you helped me. That night, Isabel called Alexander again. I accept, she said simply. I'm glad, he replied, and you could hear the smile in his voice. The semester starts in 6 weeks. I'll help you with the move. And so, with a mix of terror and hope, Isabel Rivers closed one chapter of her life and opened a brand new one. The city welcomed Isabel with rain. It wasn't the heavy rain that had fallen that night at the restaurant, but a soft drizzle, almost sad, that wet the stone streets and made the lamps shine. The apartment Alexander had found was near the university, in an old building with thick walls and high windows. Sarah ran through the empty rooms, amazed by the space. For her, everything was an adventure. For Isabel, it was the real weight of a choice she still didn't know if was right. The first days were too much. The university was huge, full of young students who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Isabel, at 27, felt out of place. Too old, too tired, too full of jobs that the others didn't have. Classes were hard. Anatomy, body functions, medical steps, terms she had never heard. Ideas she had to study after putting Sarah to bed, when sleep pulled at her eyes and coffee no longer worked. There were nights when she wanted to quit. Nights when she looked at the phone ready to call Alexander and tell him she was wrong, that she couldn't do it, that it had been a mistake. But then she remembered the porch among the olives, the words about fear and weight, and most of all she remembered Sarah sleeping in the next room, dreaming of a mother who helped other kids. Alexander kept his distance, but he was always there in small ways. A text asking how the first test went. Books that appeared in her mail right when she needed them. Once the car broke down and the next day it was fixed, without her saying anything. "How did you know?" she asked him by phone. "I have eyes," he replied simply, "and friends who look out." He wasn't pushy, he wasn't bossy. He was just someone making sure the rocks on the road were moved before she tripped on them. 6 months after the start of the course, Isabel passed her first semester with high marks. She wasn't the best in class, but she was among the top. Her teachers noticed something in her that other students didn't have. Drive forged in years of survival. "You have potential," the clinical nursing teacher told her. "But more important, you have heart. And that cannot be taught." Isabel kept those words like a treasure. Sarah, meanwhile, bloomed. She loved the new school. She had made friends. Her teacher sent good notes. For the first time in her short life, she had stability. And that, more than anything else, gave Isabel the strength to go on. One spring afternoon, at the end of the first year, Alexander visited. He hadn't warned. He just appeared in the park where Isabel used to take Sarah on Sundays. Sarah saw him first and ran toward him, shouting his name. He picked her up, laughing, and walked toward where Isabel was sitting on a bench. "Surprise," he said with a shy smile. "Good surprise," she replied. They sat together while Sarah played on the swings. They talked of simple things, the weather, the university, the changes in the old city. Neither spoke of that night at the restaurant. It didn't need to be said. It was always there, like an invisible presence that had tied their lives in ways neither had expected. "How are studies going?" he asked. "Surviving. Sometimes well, sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, but I keep going. That's all that's needed, to keep going." He looked at her with a face Isabel couldn't quite figure out. It wasn't love. It wasn't like a father. It was something deeper. Respect, shared pride, silent thanks. "There's something I want to tell you," Isabel said after a moment. "For a long time I felt guilty, as if I owed you something impossible to pay, as if everything you did for me grew a debt I could never clear. You owe me nothing. I know, now I know. It took me time to understand it, but I finally do. What you did wasn't making a debt. It was fixing a balance, and that is something completely different." Alexander nodded slowly. "The world works better when people help without keeping count, when good is returned not by duty, but because it's right." Sarah came running back with red cheeks and a yellow flower in her hand that she gave to Alexander. "For you, because you are our friend." He took the flower with a seriousness that made Isabel smile. In that moment, under the spring sun, surrounded by the sound of kids playing and the smell of blooming trees, the three of them formed a picture of something none could have. Guessed a year ago, a chosen family, built not on blood but on choices. The next 2 years went by in a rush of classes, hospital work, study nights, and small moments of joy that made it all okay. Isabel became a respected name in her school. She wasn't the smartest in books, but her teachers noticed something special in how she treated patients during work. "You don't just see symptoms," Dr. Miller, the work boss, told her once. "You see people, and that is what makes great nurses." Sarah grew, too. She was now 9 years old, read books above her level and had a love for the stars. Alexander, who visited every few months, had given her a telescope for her birthday. The girl spent hours at the window, looking for star shapes, naming planets with the same seriousness as a star pro. The bond between Isabel and Alexander had grown into something hard to name. They weren't a couple. They had never crossed that line. But they weren't just friends either. There was something deeper, more complex, a link forged in extreme states that had grown into total trust. He never asked her anything she didn't want to share. He never tried to control her choices. He was just there, like a constant but not pushy presence, ready to support when needed and to step back when not. In the last year of school, Isabel faced her biggest test, Hard work at the children's hospital, 12-hour shifts, complex cases, sad states, sick kids, families destroyed by fear. The thin line between life and death that was drawn every day in those white halls. There were times when Isabel came home and cried in silence, careful not to wake Sarah. Times when she wondered if she was really made for this, if she could hold the weight of so much other people's pain. One very hard night, after losing a 7-year-old patient who had been fighting a final illness, Isabel sat on her room floor, back against the wall, and called Alexander. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said when he answered. Today we lost a kid, and his mom looked at me as if I could have done something more, as if..." She broke. The tears she had been holding finally came out. Alexander didn't try to fix it with empty words. He just listened. For 10 minutes he let her cry while he stayed silent on the other side of the line. "Do you know what's the hardest part of having power?" he finally said. "It's accepting that even with all the money in the world, there are things you can't control. There are losses you can't stop, and you have to learn to live with that weakness. How do you do it? By remembering that being weak against death doesn't cancel the power to ease pain while there is life. You can't save everyone, Isabel. No one can. But you can make the time they have more worthy, more human, and that is not little. It is everything." Isabel dried her tears. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "All of this, getting involved with me, changing your life for someone you met just for a few minutes." "Never," he replied without doubt. "That night when you spilled that glass, you didn't just save my life. You reminded me why it was worth living. There are people who go through the world taking. You went through and gave, without thinking of the cost, without waiting for pay. And I have tried since then to live up to that example." They hung up shortly after. Isabel stayed sitting on the floor, phone in hand, feeling that something inside her had settled. The pain was still there. The loss still hurt. But now she had a clearer goal. It wasn't about saving everyone. It was about being there for each one. The next day, she went back to the hospital with puffy eyes but new drive. And when a young, scared mother asked if her son would be okay, Isabel didn't give fake hope. She gave her presence, her time, her heart, and that, in that moment, was enough. Graduation was held on a bright June day, with a sky so blue it looked fake. Isabel put on the cap and gown with shaking hands. For 3 years she had worked toward this moment. 3 years of early mornings, of doubts, of losses. And now she was here, minutes from crossing a stage and getting a degree that would change her life forever. Sarah, in a yellow dress she had picked herself, looked at her with eyes full of pride. Beside her was Mrs. Miller, who had traveled specifically for this day. The old lady had tears in her eyes. "I told you you'd do it," she whispered, squeezing Isabel's hand. "I always knew you would." Alexander arrived just before the start. He wore a dark suit but no tie, quiet as always. He sat in the back row, not drawing notice, just watching. When they called Isabel Rivers' name, she walked toward the stage with a firm step. The dean gave her the paper and shook her hand. There was clapping, like for all the graduates. But for Isabel, that sound was the echo of every night without sleep, every test passed, every moment of doubt beaten. She wasn't the best in her class, but she got a special mention for great clinical work. When the work boss read her name and explained that this mention was for students who showed great technical skills mixed with heart, Sarah clapped so hard several people turned to look. After the ceremony, they met in a small place near the school. Miller, Sarah, Alexander, and Isabel. No need for more. These were the people who mattered. "A toast," Miller said, raising her water glass. "For Isabel, for her courage, for her drive, for showing us that it's never too late to chase a dream." They toasted. Sarah asked for leave to toast too. "For Mom," the girl said with seriousness, "because she is the bravest person I know." Isabel felt the lump in her throat. She looked at her daughter, at Miller, and finally at Alexander. He raised his glass in silence with a small smile that said more than any speech. They ate, they laughed, they shared stories. For a few hours all was simple. No painful past, no unsure future, only the present, bright and warm like the sun through the windows. When Miller took Sarah to buy an ice cream, Isabel and Alexander stayed alone at the table. "I have something to tell you," he said. "The children's hospital where you worked wants to hire you. It's a permanent spot. Good hours, good pay. If you are interested, the job is yours. Isabel looked at him surprised. How? I had nothing to do with the offer. He stopped her. Your boss called me a week ago. She wanted to make sure you knew they wanted you on their team. I am just the messenger. And what do you think? Alexander leaned forward. I think you should do what makes you happy. If that hospital is where you want to be, take it. If you prefer to look at other ways, do it. For the first time in years, Isabel, you own your path, and that is the only thing that matters. She smiled. A real, full smile, without a trace of the worry she had carried for so long. I'm going to take it. I'm glad. They looked at each other in silence. Between them was something neither named but both knew. It wasn't love, it was something deeper, more lasting. It was the certainty that their lives were tied in ways time could never undo. Thank you, Isabel finally said, for everything. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For not giving up. No. He stopped her softly. Thank you. For reminding me that courage is not measured in bank accounts, but in choices. For showing me that the most great part of people is in the simplest acts. Miller and Sarah came back with ice creams for all. The private moment broke, but the link stayed. Some things didn't need words to exist. That night, while putting Sarah to bed, Isabel sat on the edge of the bed and touched her daughter's hair. Do you know what I learned these years? She said softly. What, Mum? That the world changes with small choices. A spilled glass, a door that opens, a hand that reaches out, and that the most important people are not those who have more, but those who give more. Sarah yawned, half asleep. Like you, Mum. Like many, Isabel replied, kissing her forehead. Like many. 6 months after her graduation, Isabel had found her rhythm at the children's hospital. The shifts were still hard. The cases still broke the heart. But now she had tools, knowledge, and most of all she had the certainty that she was exactly where she should be. One December afternoon, while checking charts at the desk, she noticed a young woman in the waiting room. She would be 23 or 24, dark hair in a messy tail, clothes that had seen better days. She held a 3-year-old kid in her arms while talking to the desk girl, and there was something in her stance, slumped shoulders, lost look, that Isabel knew at once. It was the stance of someone carrying the world alone. She walked over during her break. Do you need help? She asked softly. The woman looked up. She had deep dark circles and red eyes from crying. My son has a fever. He's been like this for 3 days. I don't have full health insurance. I came because I didn't know where else to go. Isabel looked at the kid. He was hot, sleepy. He needed help now. Come with me, she said, making the choice on the spot. We are going to make sure your son gets the help he needs. We will solve the rest later. 2 hours later, the kid had been checked, given medicine, and was resting well. He had an infection that needed pills, but nothing grave. The mother, though, was falling apart. I don't know how I'm going to pay for this, she said with a shaky voice. I work as a waitress. I barely have enough for rent. The kid's father is not there. I am alone and... She broke down. Isabel sat next to her and put an arm over her shoulders. Breathe, she said softly. Your son is fine. That is what matters now. The rest has a fix. The woman looked at her with desperate eyes. How? How does it have a fix when there is no money? When every day is a fight just to keep breathing? Isabel knew that despair. She had lived it. She had felt it in her own bones. Do you know what saved me? She said after a moment. It wasn't money. It wasn't a lucky break. It was someone who didn't pretend they didn't see. Someone who chose to help without asking for anything back. She took a card from her pocket. It wasn't Alexander's. It was another. From a help program the hospital offered. One she had found weeks before. Go to this address tomorrow. Tell them Nurse Rivers sent. They will help with the medical costs. And if you need someone to talk to, someone who understands, she wrote her personal number on the back of the card. You can call me. The woman took the card with shaking hands. Why? She whispered. Why do you do this for me? You don't even know me. Isabel smiled sadly. Because someone did it for me once. And I learned that the only way to thank that kind of good is to return it to the world. The woman left half an hour later, with her son asleep in her arms and the card in her pocket. Isabel watched her leave, feeling an echo of herself in every step of that mother. That night, she called Alexander. Something happened today, she told him. I met a woman, a single mother, scared, no money, and for a moment it was like looking in a mirror from 4 years ago. Did you help her? I tried. I gave her info, contacts, my number if she needs to talk. You did more than try, he said. You did exactly the right thing. It made me think of something, of how things could have been different if I hadn't spilled that glass, if I had pretended I didn't see, if I had... But you spilled it. He stopped her softly. You made the hard choice, and that choice changed 2 lives, maybe more, because now you're changing other lives, and those people will change others. And that is how the world gets better, not with big acts, but with small choices made by brave people. Isabel felt tears in her eyes. Sometimes I still find it hard to believe that all this is real, that my life has changed so much. It is real, and you deserve it, every part of it. They hung up shortly after. Isabel stayed sitting in silence, phone in hand, looking out the window at the city lights. Outside, the city lived. Thousands of stories happening at once. Thousands of choices being made. Some good, some bad, all important. And she was part of that now. A small piece in the infinite puzzle of people, but a piece that mattered. 3 years had passed since that rainy night at the Roman. Isabel was now 30 years old, and when she looked in the mirror in the morning, she saw a different woman from the one she had been. Not just in looks, though the dark circles had softened and she stood taller, but in something deeper, in the way her eyes looked at the world, with less fear, with more certainty. Sarah was 12 years old now, and starting to show signs of the woman she would be. Smart, with a curiosity that led her to ask impossible questions about the stars. Kind, able to see when someone needed help even before adults did. And strong, with a silent strength Isabel knew because she had caught it from her. Life had found its rhythm. It wasn't perfect. No life is. But it was hers. Isabel worked at the children's hospital and loved her job with a fire that sometimes surprised her. Hard days still existed. There were nights when she came home with a heavy heart from cases she couldn't fix, from pain she couldn't ease. But now she faced them with tools, with knowledge, and most of all, with the certainty that she was exactly where she should be. She had made deep friends with other nurses. Mary, who taught her to laugh even in the hardest shifts. Robert, who shared her night shift and with whom she could talk about anything and nothing. She had a group, a place in the world that was hers. Alexander was still part of their lives, though his presence had grown naturally with time. He no longer needed to check if they were okay. Isabel had built her own stability, her own base, but he sent messages on birthdays with words carefully picked that always made her smile. He appeared sometimes for dinner, bringing Sarah's favorite dessert and business stories that made the girl laugh. He was a quiet constant in daily life, like a far light you don't need to look at all the time, but that feels good to know is there. One Saturday afternoon in March, while Isabel walked down the hospital hall during her shift, checking a list on her tablet, she heard a familiar voice that made her stop. Nurse Rivers. She looked up and saw the woman she had helped 8 months before. She knew her at once, though something basic had changed. She no longer carried slumped shoulders, as if the whole world weighed on them. Her clothes were newer, cleaner, with the kind of pride that comes from being able to choose, and she held the hand of her son, who was no longer that sleepy and feverish kid, but a boy with red cheeks who ran happy down the hall, pointing at the colors of the art on the walls. "You don't know how much I wanted to find you," the woman said, and there were tears in her eyes, but they were good tears. They hugged like old friends, like sisters separated by time and brought together by fate. "How are you?" Isabel asked, feeling a lump in her throat. "And your son?" "Good. Better than good. Michael is healthy, strong, happy." The woman touched her son's hair with a love that broke the heart. "I took your advice. I went to that program you told me. They helped with the medical bill, they linked me with social services, but it was more than that. They helped me find a better job, one with perks, with hours that let me be with my son. We got a safer apartment in a place where Michael can play outside without me staying up all night worried." She paused, looking for words that could hold all she felt. "Everything changed because you saw me. You really saw me. Not just as a problem or a number. You saw me as a person, a mother, someone who deserved help. And you didn't pretend I didn't exist, like all the others. Isabel felt tears ready to come. She blinked fast. I only did what someone did for me once, she said with a soft voice. Then that person must be great. And you are too. Don't believe it. Isabel smiled. That person would tell you exactly what I tell you now, that I was just paying back a favor. That good, when received, must be given back to the world. The woman took a photo from her bag. It was of Michael smiling with a preschool degree in his hands. His first win, she said with pride. And none of this would be possible without you. I want you to know that every day when I see him happy, I think of the nurse who saved us. Not just him from the fever, but me from the dark. They said goodbye with real promises to keep in touch. And as Isabel went on her rounds, she felt something warm growing in her chest. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something deeper. It was the gut understanding that choices matter, that small acts create waves that spread in all ways, touching lives you will never know, changing futures you will never see. How an act in one way had made waves that kept growing. How good, when returned, didn't split but grew. That night, after helping Sarah with her math homework, problems that made her feel proud of how far her daughter had come, and putting her to bed with a kiss and a love you whispered, Isabel sat on the sofa with a cup of tea and looked at the photos on her phone. There was one from her graduation, with Sarah clapping in the front row and Miller drying tears of joy. Another of Sarah on her first day of school in the city, with a bag bigger than her and a smile that lit up the whole picture. One more of the three, her, Sarah and Alexander, in the park on a spring afternoon, laughing at something she no longer recalled, but whose joy she could still feel. They weren't photos of great moments. There were no grand views or huge parties. They were photos of life, simple, real, beautiful in its total normalness, and that, Isabel found, was exactly what she had always wanted. Her phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was Alexander. "Am I bothering you?" he asked with that politeness he never lost. "Never," Isabel replied, settling on the sofa. "How are you?" "Good. Just back from meetings. Long, but good. But I wasn't calling for that. I read about the help program you put forward. At the hospital. For poor nursing students. It's smart, Isabel, really smart." She smiled. She had worked on that for months, writing and rewriting, doubting if it was good enough. "It's just my way of giving back," she said. "Like you did for me." "No," he fixed firmly. "It's your way of being you. I only opened a path that was closed, but you are the one walking it, the one growing it, the one building new paths for others. That doesn't come from me. It comes from you, from who you are." There was a comfy silence, the kind that only exists between people who know each other well. "Do you know what's funny?" Isabel said after a moment, looking at her teacup. "Sometimes I still think of that night. Of that second, I decided to trip. It wasn't brave. It wasn't grand. It wasn't even well planned. It was gut. Almost stupid if you think about it. I could have lost my job. I could have made it all worse. It was human," Alexander replied, and there was a smile in his voice. "And the human at its best is exactly that. Gut to protect, to help, to do the right thing even when not easy, even when not safe. That is true courage, not the lack of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't done it?" "Every day," he replied without doubt. "And every day I am glad you did, because that choice didn't just save me. It showed me something I had forgotten in business meetings, that the most valuable people are not the most powerful, but the most ready to give." They talked for almost an hour about things simple and complex at once, the work of both. Sarah's last tests, and how she was thinking of studying the stars. The changes in Alexander's company, and how he had finally made the fixes for which he almost died. Life in all its great normal mess. When they hung up, Isabel stayed sitting in the dark, with cold tea in her hands, but not caring. She thought of all the choices that had brought her here. Some big, like leaving a mean man with just a bag and her girl. Most small, like that spilled glass, like taking Alexander's help, like getting up every morning and choosing to try one more time. But all important, all needed. She thought of Thomas Beltran, who, according to Alexander, had finished his short time and now lived far away, working quietly in a small office, as far from his old life as could be. There was no easy fix for him, but at least there were results, and maybe, one day, understanding. She thought of the men who had ordered the hit, names that once were in business mags and now served long times in prison, stripped of the power they had used to try to destroy. She thought of the young mum she had helped that day, of Michael smiling with his degree, and of all the people she didn't know yet but whom she might help tomorrow, next week, next year. And she thought of Sarah sleeping quietly in her room with her telescope by the window and a book on stars on the nightstand, unaware of the weight of all her mother had carried to give her that peaceful present full of chances. The next day was Sunday, but Isabel had taken an extra shift. They needed nurses, and she never said no when she could help. She was in the nurse room fixing supplies when she saw a new student trip with a medical cart. The tools fell to the floor with a crash. The girl said sorry many times, with red cheeks and shaking hands while trying to pick up everything. "Easy," Isabel said, kneeling to help her. "We all start. Feel like this. I once spilled a glass of water on a big guest in a restaurant. Things full. What matters is how we act." "First day?" she asked while they picked up the tools. "First week," the student replied with a shaky voice. "And I already feel I am no good for this, that I made a mistake choosing nursing. Everyone else seems to know exactly what to do, and I just trip over everything." Isabel knew that fear. She had felt it 1,000 times. She felt it still on some hard days. "Can I give you a tip?" The girl nodded with hopeful eyes. "Don't judge yourself by the errors you make at the start. Judge yourself by how you act on them, by if you learn, by if you go on when it would be easier to quit, and most of all, by if you recall why you chose this path." She gave her the last tools and looked at her directly. "Why did you choose it?" The student thought for a moment. "Because I want to help. I want to be the person who is there when someone else feels alone and scared." Isabel smiled, a full, real smile. "Then you already have the most important part. The work is learned. The steps are memorized. But heart, the real wish to help, that cannot be taught. You have it or you don't, and you have it." She gave her a friendly squeeze on the shoulder. "You're going to be fine. Just remember one thing. Always see the people, not just the symptoms, not just the illness or the problems. See the people behind all that. See their fears, their hopes, their life. And everything else will come." The student left with a shy but hopeful smile, with shoulders a bit more straight. Isabel went back to her work, but while serving water to a kid in the ward, a 5-year-old boy with big eyes that reminded her of Sarah at that age, she had a thought that made her smile. Everything had started with a simple glass of water spilled at the right time, an act that at the moment looked like an error, a mess, the end of all. And from that moment, a whole life had grown, new, different, full of goal and meaning. The world was not changed with miracles, she thought, while the kid drank the water and smiled back. It was changed with choices, with small acts of courage that piled up, one on top of the other, until they made something bigger than the sum of its parts, with people who chose to see instead of looking the other way, with acts that cost little but meant everything, a life saved, a future built on the courage of a second, and the deep truth, marked in her bones, that when someone chooses to see, when someone chooses to act, when someone chooses not to pretend that others' pain doesn't exist, when someone decides that a life is worth more than ease or safety, everything changes, forever. Isabel looked out the hospital window at the city. The lights shone under the sun, thousands of lives happening at once, thousands of choices being made right now. Some would change the world, others would not be noticed, but all mattered, and she was part of that web. A small piece that had chosen in a key moment to spill a glass instead of looking away. That choice had changed everything, and it would keep changing it, in waves that would grow much further than she could ever see, touching lives she would never meet, inspiring choices she would never watch, because that is how good works in the world, not with blasts but with whispers, not with grand acts, but with small moments of normal courage. A life changed, and the simple and deep truth that we matter, we all matter,